All right, Mr. Ames. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Why are you a poet?
I'm a poet because I love to write. And, it just came to me. It's nothing that I planned on. I just started writing, and I got inspired just by hearing poetry.
Okay. How long have you been pursuing poetry?
For about 3 years. But actually, I've been writing for 40 years.
Have you had any influences or mentors or teachers?
I had a friend of mine who's a folk musician and writer, and a great writer. He wrote poetry and sang it, and he was very, very successful, and actually he inspired me because I was writing when I met this person, and when I met him, we clicked, we were friends, and after I found out his was really poetry, I started bouncing some of mine off of him, and he liked it, and that influenced me a lot.
When were you first exposed to poetry?
Well, probably, I don't know, just when I was a kid.
Okay. Has your work appeared in any anthologies or journals?
Texas Poetry Calendar, and I got a first place in a poetry contest down in Port Aransas.
Okay. Can you share with us some of your most memorable experiences in your poetry career?
Just hearing good poets. I like to listen to the poetry, and I like to read, but I really like hearing how the words fit together and make a rhythm. And it's all good to me when I hear poetry and it rings and it makes you feel good. And to me, that's a memorable experience.
Okay. Can you define poetry for me? What is poetry to you?
Poetry it's a rhythm of words that comes across and produces a feeling in you. And to you, it has meaning. For some people, they might hear the same poem at the same time and it doesn't ring a bell with them. But with me, I really like it. So, it just depends on the situation and how you hear the poem.
Okay. Do you feel that poetry is important?
I think it's important.
Okay. It was brought up in a conversation earlier today that poetry isn't really selling on the market. It's not achieved the same sales as some of the modern books like Twilight and books such as that. It was followed up with a statement that said poetry is basically dead. Do you feel that poetry is dead?
No, and it depends on where you are. In America, it seems like poetry isn't respected like it is in other places. In China, I was reading about in China, the people there really like poetry, and they pursue poetry, and everyone listens to poetry. And South America, people listen to poetry, and people appreciate poets for what they are. And they're writers. It's like writing books, and so it all depends on where you are, and I think that it's really important in this world to have this.
In your poetry career, have you ever come across any kind of negative attitudes towards poetry?
It seems like the younger generations aren't really concerned about poetry. There's not enough action in it or something. I don't know what it is, but it's a little too slow or maybe too long, or maybe the poets aren't very good that they've been hearing. And so it all depends on where they are and what they're hearing. And I think a couple of generations back, it was more respected. But I think it's picking up some steam now. I mean, it's catching on from other countries because we're having more people immigrate that do respect poetry.
Okay. You're seeing a lot of poetry in other countries that is being more respected in other countries. Do you think America is sort of being left behind? Are we behind the gap there?
I think so. I think we have maybe too many distractions here. There are too many things going on. We don't have time for poetry. And we just can't make time because it's just the day's only so long. And I mean, we've got to watch TV and we've got to go to this place and do that. And I think it takes time to respect it. And I think it's going to change as time goes on. I think it's going to grow.
Okay. It was brought up in a earlier conversation that there's a lack of feeling today, and that lack of feeling is sort of why people can't get into poetry and they can't understand poetry. Do you think that that's a fair statement to make?
Depends on the individual. You know, if they don't read, if they don't know how to listen, if they don't know anything about the art of poetry, then they're really not going to get into it, I don't think, unless they hear a song maybe or something that appeals to them. But yeah, they need to really be able to hear some good poetry and care about it.
Okay. Have you yourself tried to pursue publishing in other venues aside from what you've listed earlier?
No.
No? Okay. When you're writing a piece, you're writing it down. Do you fear that when you read it to an audience, there's going to be like a dissonance between what you're saying and what they'll be reading later on?
Well, I think everybody in the audience hears something different. It's just like when you look out and you see, you're not seeing the same thing everybody else is seeing, and you hear it differently. And I think it all depends on the individuals and the delivery, how you present your poems.
Okay. The internet has made a lot of things easier. I mean, we can get Wi-Fi anywhere. As I can go to McDonald's just up the road and get on my iPad and look at any website I want to with their Wi-Fi. Do you think that, having the internet, having that access, do you think it's watered down poetry at all, or has it had some benefits to poetry?
I think it's a distraction to poetry. I think it's a distraction to living, actually. It's really not as good as actually hearing poetry read in person.
Okay. Poetry's had some historical moments. We've had a lot of poets go out to protest rallies. They challenged hot button issues that were in the news. Do you think that there's moments today where poets have gone out to actual protest rallies today in 2014 and they've challenged issues?
Yeah, look at Bob Dylan. He changed the world in a way. He's a big influence, and he was a poet. And sure.
Okay. Aside from Bob Dylan, do you think there's any other prophets today that are out there that are trying to challenge things?
I don't really think Bob Dylan was a prophet, but I certainly I think that there are people out there writing poetry and really trying to say something, and depends on what their audience is, and what they're pursuing.
Okay. There's an article that says you can tell a medium is still vital by posing a question. Can it change anything? Can poetry change anything?
Well, yeah, look what Bob Dylan did. He changed things, but he had a guitar with it. He would put the music, but it was poetry. So it depends on your presentation and your content and your audience.
Okay. Based on your experience with poetry, do you think that poetry can still teach us something new?
I think so, sure. If you listen to it, and you can, and your ears are open, you can hear. Sure.
Do you think that there are enough events that help generate awareness for poetry? I mean, there's the Houston Poetry Fest that's coming up, and then there's Austin International Poetry Festival that just happened a few months back. Do you think that there could be more events like that?
I'm sure there can be. I don't know how effective those are. Maybe they're not reaching the people. Maybe they're just reaching other poets. I don't know.
Okay. As a poet, what is your message to younger faces that are just getting into the poetry world?
Read, listen, pay attention. Go out and see poetry and write a lot. Write and keep it, because once you improve on your poetry, you're not going to be interested in anybody reading it, because you'll think it's no good, and it'll give you something you can work on. It takes time.